This is the mighty PlayStation 2 DualShock 2 controller, which comes with the PlayStation 2, and this is one of the greatest video game controllers ever made. But before the DualShock 2 and now the DualShock 3, there had to be the original PlayStation DualShock controller. Analog joysticks, a rumbling function, and it's gray because all the PlayStation 1 accessories, or most of the PlayStation 1 accessories, were gray to match the original PlayStation 1. This was released in 1998 and is still one of the greatest video game controllers ever made, and is nearly identical to the DualShock 2 controller, except this has analog buttons. This one does not. For games like Gran Turismo 4 on the PlayStation 2, you could accelerate a little bit or all the way depending on how hard you pushed the button. This one does not work like that. It's either on or off. All or nothing. The rumbling function feels more or less the same. It's hard to tell. I've tested both of these side by side. This one is obviously much older than this controller, so it's hard to say where the motor may have run down. The joysticks on this one feel slightly looser than they do on this controller, but that's probably due to age. So for games like Gran Turismo 1, the DualShock controller is about 1,000 times better than the standard old-school PlayStation controller. DualShock and analog controller compatible. If we look at Gran Turismo 2 here, it tells you more specifically vibration compatible and analog compatible, although the vibration and analog controller works for both of these games, the original Gran Turismo and Gran Turismo 2. And when you run into a wall in this game, this thing feels like it's going to rumble out of your hand. Here's the DualShock controller next to the original, regular old school PlayStation 1 controller. You can see that it's basically the exact same thing with the addition of the DualShock analog sticks and much larger buttons in the front. It's also heavier and obviously has the rumble function, and there's a button on the front here so that you could turn on the analog function or turn it off. That would light up red if it was on, if this was plugged into a PlayStation, which it's not right now. I'm just holding it. Also, they've moved the buttons around a little bit. Start and select button have moved. The standard PlayStation buttons continue to this day, and the controller plugs are identical, and both of these will also work with the PlayStation 2. So there you have it. Look at the difference in size there. Wow. You can really feel the weight of this thing too. It just feels substantial. Here's a look at the underside, and here's, in comparison, the PlayStation 2 DualShock 2 controller. It says analog controller SCPH 1200, whereas this one is the analog controller SCPH 10010. I swear they just pull these numbers randomly out of a hat. Let's look at the original one. Now I'm curious to see what this one is. That's the Sony controller SCPH 1080. Like, what's the SCPH 1? Is it just a button? Some games like Tekken 3 don't even tell you that this works with the rumble function, but it does, so that when you punch people, you could feel it thanks to the DualShock dual motor thing in here, giving you a rumbling function. Like I said, I tested both of these side by side and noticed very little difference in the rumbling. If you're going to be playing a game like Gran Turismo 4 on the PlayStation 2 where you want analog acceleration and braking, you're really better off with a PlayStation 2 DualShock 2 controller. However, in a pinch, if the only one that you can find is the DualShock 1, then this will work for you. Everybody always asks why I don't use a DualShock 3 controller, because for the price I would have expected it to rumble more than the DualShock 1, but it doesn't. It feels like it's just barely vibrating when you're playing video games. These things practically shake the house, which is why they're my favorite controllers for the PlayStation. As far as I can tell, the dual analog sticks on the DualShock 1 controller are identical to those on the DualShock 2, as is the D-pad with some slight texturing on there, if you can catch that. And the PlayStation buttons look the same, but they're not. Here's a look at the front of these two things. I don't know why, but they remind me of TIE fighters, and that's cool. It took me a while, but I finally found a difference, a clear difference between these two other than the buttons. The plug is bigger for the DualShock 1 controller compared to the DualShock 2. Look at that. Does that mean it's better? I don't know. I don't know what this means. There's also more writing on the back of it. I don't know what any of that crap means either. Maybe if you listen very closely, they sound different. Yeah, let's find out. Take the mic off. Oh, how convenient. I'm using a Sony microphone. There. This should be an unbiased analysis of the sound. Okay, this is the DualShock 2. This is the DualShock 1. This one has a lower frequency when you hit it. Ah, that's good to know. If you're going to make music with your controllers, you'll want one of each for sure.